I feel like I'm back in school 40 years ago or 50, whenever it was, when there was no air conditioning, you know, and
Yeah, but we had windows to open.
But we had windows. But it was nevertheless, it was June, June, and we were dying to get out because of the hot weather, right? But we learned to overcome everything, even the warm weather. So, my name is Shael Siegel. I'm introducing myself because had I let Galit or anyone else introduce me, I was afraid of what they might say. So I said I'll do it myself. I'm a transplant from the north, but not New York or New Jersey. Chicago. It's much better, much better. That means we're tolerant, we're kind, we open doors for people when we drive, we do it with a little bit of courtesy.
Don't talk about anything else.
Okay, we're done with that. So I lived in Chicago for most of my life, and we moved to this area, Aventura, North Miami Beach. And I spent my career in business, but on my background, I have a rabbinical ordination, which was Orthodox, Rabbi Soloveitchik, but life has its way of playing tricks on us and winking at us in different ways, so I'm no longer following that particular tradition. But I also did a doctorate in Jewish history at Hebrew University, where I spent many years and where I met my wife. And somehow we moved back. We moved to Chicago and made a life. 2 daughters, one in San Diego with twins, recent twins. The other one is expecting hers in August. So life is good.
Live?
She lives right here in Aventura, where I could control her.
It's nice to have children that live here.
Yes. So I chose many months ago when Galit asked me to do a book review. I said I'd like to talk about Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews. And I read it when it was fresh off the press. That was about a year ago. Since then, it's gotten a lot of press. And after I read it, and I volunteered to do a review on it, I had second thoughts, because it's a very difficult book to review for several reasons. The subject of anti-Semitism and Holocaust is like the third rail in our tradition. You can't really touch it. If you do, you're going to get burned. You can't be critical of the Holocaust. You can't be too positive about certain features within the Holocaust or negative features, because you're always going to step on somebody's toes. And it's the same thing with anti-Semitism. What is anti-Semitism? How does it manifest itself? And if I redefine it as something else, I may step on somebody else's toes. So they're hot button topics. And so I reread the book, because the first time I read it, I came away with, I'm not sure I get where she's going with this book. So I read it a second time. And then I began to read a lot of other reviews on the book. And what I found to be troublesome with the reviews, they were all too positive. Dara Horn is the cat's meow. You can't, there was 1 or 2 reviews that had anything critical to say. Bravo for Dara Horn was all I heard. She finally brought to light the subject of anti-Semitism and the attitudes that Gentiles had towards Jews. So I read the book again to find to find the positive in this. And every time I read it, I kept on bumping up against a woman with an attitude and an axe to grind, quite frankly. And it translated throughout the entire book. And then I did listen to a couple of Zoom interviews with her. And reading in between the lines, I discovered that, and I may be very wrong about this, Dara Horn was born with a silver spoon. She is the quintessential Jew who came out of we'll say a liberal, conservative meaning conservative Jewish. I don't mean conservative politically. Sort of like a mainstream Jewish home, good life, good Jewish education, but came out of a very upscale New Jersey community, and her parents, upscale people. I think her mother is a professor of in the humanities of some fields, so she sort of had a good approach. Her father, a dentist, so she came from a very good background. But I don't think she really waded into, the back streets of being Jewish. What is it all about? I don't think she ever got there. So it's almost like saying an artist drew a picture without ever really suffering life and understanding the problems of life, and just puts through something on the easel. So I somehow just don't feel that she really gets everything that there is. So what she does here in the book, she has a main thesis, which is that she feels that she was gaslighted throughout her earlier years and even her middle years of education through college and so on. She was gaslighted. Do you folks know what gaslighting means? She uses the word gaslighting. For those of you who are not familiar, not clear in how it's used, basically it's a way of manipulating. There is an abuser, a so-called abuser, who manipulates people into thinking the way they want them to think, but will deny any wrongdoing, as if they're not abusers.
Right.
So she starts the book with an interesting, she asks in her class, how many people here could name 3 death camps? And this is a class she's teaching, probably, I would guess, most of them were Jewish students. It was an Ivy League school, and the subject was probably Jewish literature, Hebrew literature, so you'd have an attraction of Jewish people. How many could name it? 3 camps. And she said, of those that raised their hands, she asked those, how many could name 3 Jewish authors? And there she drew a 0. Like nobody knew what she was talking about anymore. And so she came to the conclusion, how sad that people know about the death camps, but they don't know about how Jews lived in Europe. Which got my ear up, because knowing Yiddish or Yiddish culture doesn't necessarily mean you know how Jews lived in Europe. As a matter of fact, I know a little Yiddish, growing up in a home with my grandmother, my Bubby, who only spoke Yiddish, but I could not name Jewish authors. I could read the Jewish forward because it was always in the house, and I was taught how to read. So the forward would not have, but I couldn't read any Jewish authors. Yet, I think I had some understanding of Jewish culture in Europe. So she drew conclusions which I wasn't so sure carried with it weight. There wasn't enough balance to it. And then, with that, she draws a conclusion to the modern day world, that people feel more comfortable visiting a museum, a Jewish museum, than really entertaining Jewish culture. Meaning that they feel more comfortable in a place that celebrates Jewish life in the past than Jewish life in the present. which goes to her thesis that people like dead Jews. They feel more comfortable being able to discuss the past as though their hands are clean, there was nothing they could do, and they have no need to go any further because they're dead. That was a beautiful past, but they have no obligation to try to understand who we are as a people. So, the first thing that struck me in this argument was her ethnocentricity. And that goes back to her background in Millburn, New Jersey, because she's, as you recall, I said she was born with a silver spoon, with a mother who was a professor and a father who was a dentist. At least if you had been a good surgeon, but a dentist, they cause a little bit of pain. I don't know. I think of the word dentist, I cringe, but the point is her ethnocentricity. She felt as though there was an entitlement, that Jewish people are entitled for the rest of the world to understand our pain. And this is the part that I ask your indulgence, because this one I said at the beginning, I don't want to step on toes, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable because it is a third rail. But as a Jew who's lived my life as a Jew, on the one hand, I don't feel like I owe any obligations or excuses to anybody as to who I am and what I do. On the other hand, I don't expect anyone to come to me with their hand out, how could we've been so bad, how could we make things better, how can we make it right? I don't expect that from anybody. I don't even want them to. I don't really care what they think. It's not important to me. So that's why I feel a little bit queasy talking about this, because you may come out saying that Shael is an anti-Semite himself, which I hope to God I'm not. So she has this sense of entitlement, ethnocentricity, where the world revolves around us, Jewish people. But in the news, I wonder how much she's considered Native Americans. How much do I know about Native Americans? How much do any of you know about Native Americans? They've suffered a lot over hundreds of years. I mean, at least 200-300 years that white people came to the New World. So we did our job on them.
Yeah.
Do I even know how many Native Americans there are? Do I know how many tribes there are? Do I know what their traditions are? All I know is give them a bottle of booze and they're happy, right? Or give them a cigar, right? That's all I know as an American. So before I ask anybody else to come understand my suffering as a Jew, I need to know that we're on a level playing field, that I'm doing the same thing for other people. I doubt that Dara Horn has any notion about the American Indian, the Native Americans, anything more than I do. And what about the Uyghurs in China? If we want to talk about ethnic cleansing, how the Jews have suffered as badly as we have over the decades, without centuries, without minimizing our suffering, I also want to make sure I'm sensitive to the suffering of everybody else. So how can I expect others to want to know not about my suffering, but about my culture, if I don't know about the Uyghurs, for example, their culture? Do I know anything about them other than when I may have read in the New York Times or put on NPR and heard a little piece? I don't know anything about them. They're Muslim. I know nothing more. The Chinese are trying to remove them from this world. That I know, but why? What have they done? Who are they? What have they contributed to the world? What are their customs? What are their foods? How do they live their life? What's their art all about? What is their literature all about? I know nothing about them. So that is a problem that Dara Horn leaves on the table. She expects everybody else to drop what they're doing and to focus not on our suffering. That she doesn't want you to do. She wants you to focus on the culture that we have and the culture that we have lost. That, she says, is the crime. So this is something that that she needs to address, and she doesn't. The other piece of it is when she asked those students to name 3 Yiddish authors, I want her to do something else. I want her to ask her class to name 3 Israeli prime ministers, 3 Israeli presidents, 3 Israeli authors. That I would have expected her to do. Yet, Israel, as we'll see as we go on, never comes up in her book. It's as if we're still living in Europe or America in the 1960s, 1950s, before the 67 war, before the 73 war, before Israel became the country with the majority of Jews. Not only the majority of Jews, but also the startup country where so many other countries have turned to Israel for technology, medicine. Israel's a powerhouse. Yet the book never mentions the word, even in passing. So her ethnocentricity has caused her to trip at a certain point. And I don't mean this to be negative, by the way. You need to read the book and confirm whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong or whether there's room in there for more discussion. But what she does here as well, as I was reading it, I was saying to myself, what is she talking about? What do you mean we don't, people don't know and understand our culture? I would run to every movie that was produced, and granted, they're just movies. Granted, these are not, seminars where we can analyze the movie. But so many movies relating to our Jewish, crossing the Lancey Street. You want to talk about Jews coming to America, and I went through a whole list of movies that sort of, tells so much about our culture. Shalom Ash is a Yiddish writer. Chaim Grade is another Yiddish writer. Amos Oz, Aleph Bet Yeshua, Israeli authors. Schindler's List, Defiance. Just a couple of movies I just picked off the top of my head, or books that appeal not only to the American Jew, but appeal to. They're universally appealing, and they're watched, read by everyone. So yes, in Omaha, Nebraska, there may be somebody who did not meet a Jew, but guaranteed people who have any level of sophistication has some kind of a feel for who Jews are, and not necessarily in a negative way. So her messaging leaves much to be desired. But yet, when I read the book, the title, People Love Dead Jews, it's sort of, there was something there that I wasn't able to put my finger on it, but having read the book, with the second time around, I realized that Cynthia Ozick had written not a book, but she wrote a very long article. I think it was an Esquire or I can't recall which magazine, but she wrote this piece, which was huge. I mean, I reread it recently, and it was a very large piece, and it was titled "All the World Wants the Jews Dead." So, what is Dara Horn bringing to the table in that case? If it's already been written by Cynthia Ozick, And then I realized that Cynthia Ozik's piece was really an intellectually very, very honest piece of work. She wrote it on the background of the Yom Kippur War, where there was an existential threat to Israel. So when she wrote all the world wants the Jews dead, she was seeing it on a very political level as what's taking so long? What is taking so long for the world to wake up? Why is Henry Kissinger fiddling around and not getting at the stuff necessary, the hardware necessary, the military material necessary to win that war? What is going on? And she was screaming, but she was interchanging. Interestingly enough, she made the interchange between Israel and Jew. Jew and Israel was the same thing to Cynthia Ozick. So she got it completely. But Dara Horn doesn't make that connection. Dara Horn sees Jew as a Jew, and Israel has absolutely nothing to do with it. There's no play here for her.
Isn't she married to Michael Crichton?
I'm sorry?
Isn't she married to Michael Crichton or something, the author?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
When she takes a look at the museums, she sees the museums as a place, as a spot, as a space where the deception takes place. Because the museum is where Jews are dead, the culture is dead, and now you can look at it with a cold, analytical, academic approach without having to internalize any of it. So but then I asked myself the question, the movers, the people, the pistons that created these museums were Holocaust survivors, together with moneyed American or European Jews. But they were the engine. They were the ones who pushed the need to get the story out to as many people as possible. And so when Dara Horn claims that we kept everything on a very superficial level, but we never got into the detail, into the weeds of who we were as a people. The museums did that in many different ways. If you just go into a place like Beit HaTfutzot in Tel Aviv, I think they changed the name recently. It's on the Tel Aviv University campus. I mean, you really get a sense of Jewish culture. Granted, if you go to Yad Vashem, which we'll get to in a minute, that's a very different take. It's very specific to a specific time and place. But it also reveals a culture that was and a culture that was lost. But she does something kind of strange. And it's the cynical part of her that I find disturbing. So if we're talking Holocaust, and she talks about the diary of Anne Frank, for example. And there she says that the Americans did a horrible thing. They took the diary of Anne Frank and they turned it into a Hollywood love fest. And if I could find a quote, she says that, I'll find it somewhere, maybe not. She says that we turned it into a, I'll get to the quote in a minute, we turned it into American literature has happy endings. There's a beginning, there's the middle, which is everything is falling apart in a sense, but in American literature, everything sort of ends okay. It ends well. The guy gets the girl, the war is over, the good guys overcome the bad guys, that's the way it is. But if you take a look at Jewish literature, Yiddish literature, which is she studied, and which is her degree is in, it's never that way. There's always, the ending is always, could be kind of bad. Like, if you take a look at a Shalom Aleichem story, yeah, I mean, it's never really a great ending. So there was assimilation. They left the ones that left and assimilated, the ones that stayed died. It's not a great ending, okay? So but the Diary of Anne Frank, they had to polish it. In other words, Hollywood had to polish it up and say, and there's a quote here, and I have to find it, that I will find it. It's kind of interesting what she does, because it follows into the whole scheme of the gaslighting. Yeah. The quote is, I still believe, this is Anne Frank in her diary, I still believe in spite of everything that people are truly good at heart. So Dara Horn lights up on this. She said, good at heart, that's before she was discovered. She could say that. And I say no. She was living in a hidden room for how long? Why was she living there? She knew why she was living there. And she knew what her end may be. She wasn't stupid. So Dara Horn falls short. She's trying to show the American gaslighting that, you see, we can read this book and we can enjoy the Diary of Anne Frank because it's a good story. And that's not true. That's how Dara Horn wants to see Americans. But I don't believe that that's the truth. I believe that those who cleaned up or edited the Diary of Anne Frank did so with the intention of showing a very, very real, serious story and bringing it to the public in a way that they could understand it. That doesn't mean that anyone was gaslighted. And then on the gaslighting, she goes further, and then she hits onto the heritage sites. And she has a very significant part of the book is on this place called Harbin in China. And apparently one time Harbin was shared between Russia, it was on a border. I have not been there, but I understand it's very cold and not a very friendly place to be. But Jews had an opportunity of going there at some point, escaping a lot of the troubles that they had in Russia. It was an opportunity for them to make a lot of money and to live. So that's what they did. And then, I don't know the politics, I'm not going to get into it. The Jews were slaughtered at some point after being there for some, 100 years, maybe 200 years, maybe 150 years.
Jewish cemetery there.
Yeah, there's a cemetery there. They lived there and they did very well, but then they got wiped out. So what does China do? China builds, as they know how to do well, they throw a lot of money at it, and they say, you know what? We're going to build a site, a heritage site, and we're going to have a lot of rich Jews come to us, and we're going to make a lot of money. That's true. That's the cynical part of it. And that's the side that Dara Horn saw. How cynical can anyone get but to literally walk on the graves, to dance on the graves of these poor Jewish people that died? That's what the Chinese are doing. And I'm saying that's not the case. They're showcasing a culture of what happened here in this place at some point in time. And you're invited to visit this place. There's a man by the name of Jack Gottlieb who heritage sites is his business, and he's very he's aware of all of them throughout the world, and he wrote a piece on this when referring to Dara Horn's comment in Harbin, and he says that her narrative on Harbin is incomplete, ignoring the factors leading to the demise of the community. In fact, he maintains that the $30 million investment in this heritage site in 1984 was stunning, and China was way ahead of its time. The only comparable site would be the recent rehabilitation of the synagogue in the Venice ghetto. So, the Venice ghetto is okay, but Harbin is not. So she's picking and choosing to, her sites to serve her own purpose. What I can say is we have a wonderful expression in Hebrew, Toch shelo lishma ba lishma, which means many times we choose a direction to go in, not knowing what the final result is going to be. So many times the question was once, the way it came up, should you say the Shema Yisrael if you don't believe in God? How do you say if you don't believe in God? How do you say the Shema Yisrael? So the rabbis in their wisdom said, Toch shelo lishma ba lishma. You never know if a person says the Shema Yisrael long enough, you never know if they're going to maybe believe in God at some point. Maybe it'll register with them. Toch shelo lishma ba lishma. So I take a look at these sites, these heritage sites, and as cynical as you want to be about them, and you may be, but the truth is, people are going to come and they're going to see something, and they're going to understand that there was a culture, that there were Jewish people here. Whether or not the Chinese are making money off of it, it's not all that relevant. And so then I ask the other question. There's a place in Israel called Pekin. Pekin, P-E-K-I-I-N, Pekin, in the north, in the Galilee. And in this town, there's a Jewish, I forget her name, a Jewish lady, had a family. She's, I think, the sole survivor of this family. And how do I know about this place? I know about this place because when I was in the Army, they had an educational, they would take soldiers, and when they had a break, they got their week off, they would take them to sites and to show them our history, so to speak. So I remember taking this to Pekin, and there was at the time there was a couple, a man and a woman, and they brought us into the synagogue. It's an Arab village, Pekin. It's an Arab village in the Galilee. And you walk through very old streets and very narrow, windy, as if you were back in the Middle Ages. It's quite picturesque. And you get into the synagogue, the shul, which is, it looks like Kever Rachel. It's an arched ceiling, and it smells of mildew, and it's overgrown with all kinds of stuff. And he gets up and gives us a presentation that they are Jews that have a direct connection, a direct line from the Churban Bayit Sheni, from the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. Their family has consistently lived in Pekin and been custodians of the synagogue. From then to today. This is a heritage site in Israel. So I say to Dara Horn, would you also say that this site would you also apply the same census to this site as you do to the other Jewish heritage site? This is also a heritage site. So one has to be very careful when writing off of these heritage sites and calling them a form of gaslighting. And then she does something that you'll find very interesting. Name changing.